Chris, when you get a second, could you enable me to share my screen on the Craig Carter BKV Group one?
Yes, I will, sir.
Thanks.
And you're good to go, sir.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Black.
Okay.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Economic Revitalization Committee meeting. Today is August 7th, 2024. We are in Trade and Transit 2 on the third floor for this meeting today. We have two items on our agenda. One is going to be an update on the City Hall feasibility study and any related items. So I am going to go ahead and let Craig from BKV Group go ahead and take it away, followed up by anybody else here in the city that has anything else to add. Craig, when you're ready to share your screen, go right ahead.
Okay. Let me get back to here and we'll share my screen. Sorry, I'm on a combination of phone and audio, so please speak up if there's a challenge to hearing me at some point in time. So I want to talk about a couple of different things today and give you guys basically an update of how far we've come so far and sort of what the next steps are and stuff like that. My first task is going to be to kind of talk a little bit about the existing conditions of City Hall, which I think you guys already all know quite a bit about, of course. But I want to kind of give you a little bit of a rundown of our initial findings, just to kind of let you know kind of what we're thinking about right now, and then we'll get into the programming side of things and how much space we think you need. So the initial City Hall building it's about 52,800 square feet if you go to the outside of the walls and you take all 4 floors into consideration. It doesn't count the attic space, but that, kind of the usable space of the building, including the corridors and the bathrooms and the mechanical rooms and all that other stuff, is about 52,800 square feet. It's a pretty sizable building. One of the things we know is that the basement was causing maybe some issues with people. They didn't feel maybe very comfortable in the basement, or maybe there was some mold or some things that were causing people some issues. That's about 17,200 square feet. So you're about 35,600 square feet if you take out the basement in terms of square footage. I'm not sure that's how you would ultimately use the building. You might not eliminate the basement as occupiable space, but it's just as a number, just so you know, that's about 35,600 square feet. The structure of the building is in really good shape. We were surprised by how good a condition the building is in, kind of all told. There's a couple of areas on the exterior where there might be a little bit of tuck pointing that might be necessary. That's kind of routine maintenance stuff. That's not a huge deal. The roofs looked really good, with the exception of a little bit of the copper detailing that you're probably going to want to address in the near future. One challenge for the roofs is that the flat roof sections look pretty flat. There's maybe not as much slope to those as you really want to, because you're getting water pooling in a couple of areas that you don't want water pooling. Now, that's not to say, modern roofing materials are pretty good at holding back water, even if it's sitting on top of the roof. And you guys, have a new roof. It's pretty recent. But over the long run, that might be something, I don't think we want to tear off the roof you just put on in order to put some slope to it. But at some point in time, we would recommend, putting some slope on that roof, or a little bit more slope on that roof. And it depends a little bit on whether or not you still have a bunch of mechanical equipment up there when all is said and done. But anyway, that's something to think about. The beams, the columns, the floor slabs and stuff, everything that we could see looks really good from a structure standpoint, even up into the attic spaces where you've got the wood areas. The stoutness of the building is really solid. And so it gives you a lot of good good confidence that if you were to go back in there, the building would be standing for a good long time. The mechanical systems and the plumbing systems are not great. You have relatively new hot water boilers that can be reused, but the rest of the systems in the building, anything related to air conditioning, and anything related to actually moving the air around the building, all the fan equipment and stuff, has basically reached the end of its expected life. And in addition to that, we know that there have been some complaints about mold, and as I said, some folks who felt like they were getting sick as a result of the building. And part of when we see that sort of thing, part of it is, okay, if it's in a basement, there's you're more likely to get a little bit of humidity down there and stuff. All that stuff can be solved with an appropriately designed mechanical system that moves a lot more air, that actually moves air in spaces you can't really see. So essentially, given the age of the equipment and given the challenges that you had with people feeling like the building was kind of making them sick, that we would suggest kind of completely redoing the mechanical systems of the building, and the plumbing systems as well. I'm not, that's there's maybe some aspects of the plumbing system we're not going to tear out per se, but it's likely that the bathrooms have to be pretty well redone as well. So there's not a lot that's desperately in need of saving on the plumbing system. Let's put it that way. The electrical systems are a challenge. The equipment that was installed or that is installed in the building now is dated, and it has reached the end of its expected service life. It's going to be very challenging to get repair parts for any of that stuff or work with it. I'm sure your electricians have told you this. So if this is an opportunity to do a large remodel in the building, we'd recommend redoing the electrical systems as well. And getting a little bit of service gear into the building that's brand new is not going to make or break the concept for a renovation project. That's frequently just kind of easily absorbed into the numbers, right? The communication systems are a little bit of a hodgepodge, which is completely to be expected given the eras that this building has lived through. And so that probably needs to be kind of rethought as well, to really make that a functional facility that supports modern video conferencing, et cetera, et cetera. There's probably a lot to do on the mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and low voltage systems. So there's while the news is fantastic from a structural standpoint, it's not super rosy from the rest of the building's system standpoint, but that's to be expected. I mean, those systems just don't last as long as structural systems anyway. So you shouldn't feel too bad. From an architectural perspective, and I'm going to cover kind of the ADA and kind of the historic preservation side of things kind of at the same time here. We did a little bit of a look at what our expectations would be for if the National Park Service came in and did an audit of the building as part of since it's listed on the National Register. What would they be looking at as stuff that's critical to keep or really important to keep as you're looking at this building? And so they're gonna look at all of these sort of original walls and say this is, and flooring and ceilings and light fixtures and stuff, and say this is kind of what we want to keep. And so the red walls are original. The yellow represents sort of spaces that we would expect them to want to keep pretty pristine. So in the basement, it's not super exciting. As we go upstairs to the first floor, we talked a little bit about what's happening in these spaces over here, but really we expect that the National Park System is mostly concerned about really what's happening in the corner. A lot of the rest of the building has been significantly modified, and when you guys moved in the 70s, and so the there's probably not a lot on the first floor that the National Park System is going to be really concerned about keeping, but that front lobby area probably is something that they're keying in on. The second floor is much more, has a lot more that we think the NPS would want us to keep. And if we zoom in a little bit here, you can see, you know, the community room, the council chambers, you know, a lot of these corridor spaces. But even the interior office walls here are original. They haven't really been modified in 100 years. And so those are things that we would anticipate having to negotiate a little bit about. And ultimately, when we look at this, we're trying to, you know, kind of balance the scales. There are some things that there's a lot of things that the National Park System Service is going to want us to keep. And there's some of that we will be able to and have this remain a functional building. And there's some of that stuff that we will need to modify for this to become a functional building. And so we want to make sure that we're not tipping the scales too far in one direction or another. We don't want to, you know, force you guys into an awkward situation long term because we're afraid to remove any walls whatsoever. But at the same time, you know, if we're recommending huge changes to this, to all of these walls, the National Park System Service is going to be really upset and going to prevent us from doing that. So it's a little bit of a balancing act, and luckily that's what, you know, Joe Brown is really good at, is kind of working through that and trying to balance that out. And so when he put together this, he said that there's, you know, he's mostly focused on the yellow areas and the solid red walls, the dashed walls. We can change some of those if it's important to the long-term functionality of the building. And so whether you guys are the long-term occupants or whether you decide to sell the building to a developer and somebody else moves in as a long-term occupant, they're going to face kind of the same restrictions essentially and be trying to strike that same balance. So, you know, one of the really cool things about the building is that there is so much of this that's historic. And so it's going to be a challenge for us to try to figure out how to fit spaces into the building that make you guys operate effectively and securely without destroying the historic fabric, which is really cool. One of the things you might notice is that none of the areas that are highlighted are the bathrooms, and so the bathrooms were all done in the 70s, and when the you know, that was pre-ADA by, you know, 20 years, maybe a little bit less than 20 years. They did do a good job of trying to be open and accessible to the extent that there was any sort of guidance whatsoever to the architecture community at that time. But it doesn't meet current standards or current expectations for your visitors who are coming to the building. And so essentially all of the bathrooms would need to be completely redone. And that's probably not a surprise to you. You guys all know what an accessible restroom looks like these days. You've been in enough public buildings and really private buildings that are required to be accessible to understand that, you know, what the city hall has right now isn't meeting those standards. So we would essentially look to replace all of the bathrooms in the facility as part of a renovation project. That gives us some flexibility to move those things around as well if they don't work exactly where you got them going currently. You know, other highlights of the accessibility issues are the elevator is not the correct configuration. I don't think that it's in a bad location, but we do need to get in there and probably redo it a little bit, either stretch the car out somewhat or maybe make it longer north to south. But the elevator cab essentially just needs to get a little bit bigger. The tower obviously has it's a big footprint. And if you want to sneak people through on the public side, that kind of constrains you a little bit. That's what they decided to do on the first floor originally. But on the upper levels, that puts you in a little bit of a small little elevator lobby. But this works too. I think the challenge is just making sure that the elevator cab can be a little bit bigger And given the age of that system, it makes sense to replace the elevator. I think it would probably make a lot of people more comfortable about using it. A 50-year elevator is not guaranteed to fail or anything like that, but it does make people a little bit uncomfortable unless you kind of refresh it somewhat. There are throughout the building, there's knob hardware instead of lever hardware on the doors, which means you have to kind of grab it and twist it with your wrist, which is an ADA issue. There's established ways of dealing with that. So we can keep the historic hardware on some of these doors without really damaging the historic fabric, and we can deal with those issues. Generally speaking, the doors, the historic doors are plenty wide in order to get people through them who might happen to be in a wheelchair. A lot of the new doors might be a little bit narrow. The ones that are maybe extra concerning would be the doors into the community room and the doors into the council chambers. Those pairs of double doors are just a little bit too narrow for a wheelchair to work. We don't want to lose those. Those are, we'd like to keep those as part of the historic fabric. That just means we're going to need to put some automatic door operators there. You hit a button, the doors open for you. It's that becomes a little bit of a maintenance thing. You have to keep an eye on, but it's probably worth that little bit of maintenance to keep the historic doors in place. But then again, that said, we're trying to strike a balance between functionality and keeping the original fabric of the building. And if we can save enough of the walls and that means we can replace those doors, then maybe that's something that we're going to recommend. Yet to be determined. Then finally, I would say that, let me pause. Getting service to your customers is kind of first and foremost the thing that we're concerned about. And there's a couple of places where there's challenges getting citizens into places, getting them maneuvering around the council chambers or getting access to a countertop that's at the correct height and things like that. When we go through a major renovation problem, all those sorts of things are just going to kind of go away because we're going to need to reconfigure where counters are, and we'll do a little bit of reconfiguring of the council chambers and stuff like that. And so I'm not really worried about any of that stuff. I think the same thing with the bathrooms. It's time to renovate those anyway. As part of a renovation project, we would recommend redoing those. We'll just make them accessible through that process, so we don't really have to be overly concerned about the. I don't want to get into the nitty gritty of everything that's wrong with these bathrooms for you right now, basically. But getting into the building is a challenge still. And you guys have a beautiful new ramp on the front that'll get pedestrians and people in wheelchairs into the building here. We're just gonna have to sign the building that comes off of the entrance that comes off of the corner. If that doesn't meet the building code or the accessibility code, I'm not saying that you need to lock the doors and never let anybody in there, but there's no way to make that a great entrance that satisfies all those things while keeping the historic character of the building. So we would probably just put some signage there, direct people around the corner, which is right around the corner. It's not like they have to go around the building, but direct people around the corner to use these entrances. But we've got a couple other points of entrance into the building. The stairs that were added in the 70s to get people access into the basement, aren't accessible, can't really be made accessible. We would probably want to either abandon those. We might be able to say that they're not necessary anymore, depending on what the layout of the basement area looks like, and or make them egress only. And so we've got some ideas for that, but we probably don't want to bring members of the general public through those spaces to bypass any sort of security or whatever. That's probably a solid recommendation from a security standpoint, as well as from an accessibility standpoint and a maintenance standpoint, et cetera. We've got this stair up here that was added for means of egress from the upper levels. This served as sort of a main point of entrance for staff in the past, and it might remain so, but I think we would want to sign it as an egress only door, sort of officially, because you can't get access to any of the building by coming in this door if you're in a wheelchair. And so if we can sign that as egress only, that probably resolves some issues. This back door, coming into where the police side of things used to be, probably remains the best opportunity for an accessible means of entrance to the building on the staff side, or a second way out, second accessible egress point. And if that's going to create some challenges with how we lay out the interior of the building, just like it created challenges with how the building operated before, where you were walking back and forth by people who were in a holding area. So we're going to try to figure out how to prevent those sort of security issues. But frankly, it's not. I don't think it's important for the general public to be able to wander all the way through the building, kind of with free reign. We would, in a modern city hall, you're typically asking the general public to stay in a smaller portion of the building unless they have been invited further in. And so we're going to show you guys some opportunities to reconfigure this building to take that sort of thing into account. But we might not need to make this back way kind of just a main public thoroughfare that people are wandering back and forth through. We might be able to concentrate members of the general public to the front areas where they can come in, they can do the business they have at City Hall, pay a bill, chat with somebody in the buildings department or zoning department, talk to the clerk, whatever business they might have. We might be able to get them to be able to do that sort of front and center, or be sort of escorted back into the facility, at which point in time they would maybe have a little bit more access to those other means of egress. So I think there's good opportunities to improve the accessibility through the process of renovation, while still keeping the historic features of this city hall in place. We're excited to start to test out how that all works, and that comes into kind of the next chunk of my presentation here. But I want to give you guys an opportunity to ask me questions about sort of that our initial read of the building.
Craig, I have no questions. Just wanted to make you aware we do have about a half an hour left.
Right. Okay. This next slide here is talking about what we think we need to put into this building to make it functional over the next 20 years. And so, as you guys know, we talked to each department within that has offices in City Hall, and really kind of drilled down, who your staff, who's in an office, who's in more of a cubicle type of space or a workstation. How do you interact with the general public? What sort of meetings do you have? What sort of storage needs do you have? And then, we challenge them to look out into the future. Is there, do you think that you have enough staff for what's happening in the future? And by and large, the staffing was pretty consistent. Now, it's not like we're saying you need to double your staff or something like that, but we got into depth with each of these groups to determine, really how much square footage they're going to need to be effective. And so we I don't want to get into a full breakdown necessarily of all of these things to kind of confuse get you a little bit more space to see some things here the Excel. I don't want to take up a million hours of your time here. But basically what we did was we looked at what the space needs you need today. And then we looked at how they might change in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, so that we have a good benchmark for planning what this need is in 20 years. We don't want to build a facility today that's going to be immediately outdated. The next time that you need to add an intern, you're trying to set them up at a coffee shop or something like that. So, so we've got this. We've got the space needs plotted out over 20 years, and as you can see, over that 20-year period, we're talking about growing maybe a little bit less than 2,000 square feet in terms of your overall space needs for these departments, and that's not a whole lot, right? So I think all the department heads kept their needs to be a little bit modest, and so that shows kind of a strong mindset from all those folks. They're not using this as an opportunity to get more power within the organization or anything like that, which sometimes we do see people have a strong vision about what they want their department to be, and it's going to explode in growth. But ultimately what we're seeing is kind of the department specific spaces, maybe about 24,000 square feet over the long run, and then another 11,000 plus square feet of shared spaces. Those are the break rooms, the council chambers, the mechanical and electrical rooms, a bunch of conference rooms, lobby spaces, those sorts of things would kind of be shared amongst all the departments, right? And then what we do is we take those numbers and we inflate them a little bit, and so all of these numbers have been increased just a little bit to account for circulation within the department and the thickness of walls and stuff like that within each department. And then we get down to this line item here where we have to add a little bit of square footage to the overall program to account for the thickness of the exterior walls of the building, as well as the corridor spaces that get you between departments. And so what we're showing here is maybe about 40,000 square feet. The big caveat is with the police department. We had originally limited our scope, and this 13,748 square feet reflects the scope to basically accommodate what's in City Hall now. So the patrol group would not be within this 13,748 square feet. We just have the command staff, the agents, the investigations group, and then some training elements, and then evidence. And the evidence takes up a goodly chunk of this, to be honest, as you might expect. And so trying to, if we put these items into a city hall and left the patrol group kind of hanging out somewhere else, it's not the ideal functional scenario for the police department. So we're going to come back. We're going to do a little bit more discussion with the police folks to determine what their space needs are for the patrol group as well, so that we have a better number if we try to move patrol into a city hall, or potentially giving us the flexibility to move police completely out of the city hall and put them into a separate building somewhere else.
So I'm going to interrupt you really quick because that's something that I did want to bring up today. We on council have expressed the desire amongst ourselves to see the entirety of the police department together, because we feel that they should be. We see our public works director, he is with the public works department and so on. So we feel that the police should be together as well. Now, regardless of whether or not that's in this particular building or it's in another building, we don't really have a preference at this point. So,
yeah, yep. So, and I think that's great. The police department will definitely benefit from that. When we talk to other municipalities, some of them want police and city hall to be in the same building. Some of them would rather them be in a different building, and largely, um, when they say that, that's driven by some of the security concerns in our modern society, and the city hall employees feeling a little bit uncomfortable being in the same building where the police are, considering that police can be targets. But I don't think that we need to get into that too much today. But we're kind of going to look at it both ways, right? Is the idea, and if the city hall building is probably large enough to fit everything that the police need and everything the city hall needs. The challenge is managing security and space needs around a challenging historic structure, and then figuring out how the parking situation is going to work for squad vehicles and stuff like that. And but the other challenge is if we move to a different building, if we look at the Chamber of Commerce building as an opportunity, as a for instance, that's probably not big enough to fit both departments, both the city hall group and the police department group. So if there's a relocation to that building, you're probably looking to find a different location for the police department. But we'll present all those sorts of options to you as we get a little bit more information. That's just our initial blush response to that. Right? So ultimately, we're looking at a building that's if we weren't trying to add in the rest of police here, we know we would have plenty of space to put you into City Hall. Once we get the police department program fully built out, we might be running up against space constraints in the City Hall building. That we'll just have to see. In terms of parking, we did do a quick parking counts, and this is something that probably needs to be vetted out a little bit more closely. But this is we want this document to serve us when we're looking at renovation of the City Hall building as well as a new construction scenario. So, obviously with City Hall being located downtown and very proximate to a couple of parking areas near the movie theater and then the deck, we might not be as worried about parking availability, because there's plenty of spots around for the general public to park, and you can set aside some spaces in those lots for employees to park or make sure that they have access to parking as well. If this is if we go to the scenario where this is a brand new building somewhere, we're going to have to make sure that we have enough parking to serve the folks. And so it's in that scenario, it's relatively straightforward to try to figure out how many staff members might be there. If you were in the middle of the summer and you were fully up on interns, maybe you would end up with needing 45 parking spaces to serve staff. And whether or not you're going to need a full 50 parking spaces for people visiting City Hall on a council meeting night is a little bit of a question. But I think some of the potential locations that we might find to locate this potential new building are not really going to have a lot of other options. And so you're going to want to provide ample parking for people to come and do business or participate in government, right? And so a lot of times it's going to look like your parking is a little bit oversized, but on those council meeting nights when you have something controversial, the last thing you need is for the general public to come in super angry because you don't have sufficient parking. And you want them to come in with an open mind and to listen to the discussion rather than already having their pitchforks out. So, we're going to have to explore these numbers a little bit more as we find potential locations to study. But our initial feeling is that maybe 144 parking stalls is a good number, and let's see how many of those we can reasonably offload to existing parking lots. So you don't have to, we don't want you to be having to build a deck or something like that just for this project. While it says 144 parking stalls, there's a little bit of a negotiation and discussion that still needs to happen with that sort of stuff.
My personal opinion on parking, Craig, is that there's plenty around, and I wouldn't even begin to start to make that a main concern. But
Yeah.
that's
Okay. All right. So, but generally speaking, um, uh, if this is being recorded, I'll flash through these things so you can kind of start to see what these numbers are looking like. But I don't want to suck up the entire meeting time. The clerk's office has got
I would
some.
also ask if you've got some major highlights, if you'd like to hit in the next 10 minutes, that you do that.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sorry. This is community and economic development. There's some. We had some good discussions here. There's a lot of great stuff happening in this department. And certainly a lot of public access that's necessary. We met with Janice, and she doesn't have a lot of space needs, but she's got a lot of storage needs, right? Storage is something that ultimately there's some fluff in the program from a storage perspective, because there's some future offices that we've got that you don't have filled with staff members today. We could use those for storage in the meantime, but eventually you guys are going to have to go through a digitization process. And so in the meantime, maybe a shared storage room somewhere in the building, might not fit everything day one. But as you go through your digitization process, you can get rid of the files you have stored in those extra offices. Is sort of the recommendation here. Codes certainly have some public interaction needs, but also have a fleet of vehicles that they need ready access to because they're in and out a lot. The controller's office is relatively straightforward. It's not a huge space need. The finance office, has a decent staff, and want to make sure that we're able to accommodate a few future workstations and stuff like that. HR has some space needs, and this is a group that has pretty significant privacy concerns, as you guys all know. And so making sure that we've got the conference rooms that they have reliable access to and stuff. And then we're also recommending a sort of a dedicated testing space, or a place where somebody who's coming in can fill out all the HR paperwork without sitting out in the middle of everywhere. We see that quite a bit these days. I'm being blocked by my little Zoom bar here. Okay. In IT, Chris is blessed with a massive space kind of downstairs right now, but he'll tell you he doesn't need quite that much space. But it's important for him to have the workroom and the space to do what he needs to do to support the folks. So not a tiny department with that workroom and stuff built in. The mayor's office isn't as palatial as what we see at the city hall building, with a kind of integrated boardroom and an office and stuff. It's and none of the office spaces we're talking about are, well, actually, let's put it this way. I think all of the office spaces that were requested were small. And as I was bouncing in and out of meetings, Kelly was there the whole time, but I was bouncing back and forth to City Hall and doing some other, kind of the accessibility work. And when I came back and she had programmed in some really small offices, I got concerned. So I, essentially what the discussion was, and I wasn't a part of it, was that, we don't need to build in large meeting tables into all of the department directors' offices. If they have more than a couple people, they will go into a conference room. And so that's a big space saver. Kind of the way that that business is kind of being done in the city right now. And so that's part of the reason why maybe these offices look a little bit smaller, or actually I would say significantly smaller than what you guys have in Trade and Transit, and what you guys had at the City Hall. Is that people's expectations are they would rather jump into a conference room than call all their staff members into their office for a meeting. So it's a little bit more egalitarian. It's a nice thing to see. I'm going to skip police just because there's, we still have a lot of work to do with this when we integrate the patrol folks in here. Recreation does not have a major space need. That's a relatively small thing, just some storage and maybe a little bit of public counter access. The tax folks, don't really want any private offices. They want to all be kind of upfront and being able to deal with the general public. But we put one in against their wishes in case the next official would prefer an enclosed workspace. Some people work better out amongst people. Some people work better in an enclosed workspace. So we're trying to provide that flexibility. From the council standpoint, we've got a council chambers. We've got the ability to do some AV production. So being able to record the meetings and have some of these things, something that it's a huge trend in city halls. And ultimately, you might end up with some social media folks that are wanting a little bit more capability than they can get just sitting at their workstation. So we've got a little bit of space programmed in for something like that. A little bit more for video production and audio production, voiceover work and stuff. We've got a council workroom or a space for council members to kind of put their bags before a meeting, or if they're running early, they can pop up their laptop and sit down and chit chat. Sorry, I got to decline a call here. And then a dedicated restroom off the council dais is important. So just for convenience sake, right? And then into the building support areas, these are the lobbies, these are the restrooms, the public counters, training rooms or community rooms, which is, that might be something that ultimately, if we can't fit into one of these buildings, would maybe go by the wayside or maybe get partially combined into a council chambers. There's ways to do that, maybe save some square footage. Then we've got the staff side spaces that, the staff restrooms ought to be different than the public restrooms, just for security's sake and avoiding sort of awkward confrontations when you're just trying to use the restroom, but somebody might have told somebody that they're not allowed to build this on their property because the zoning doesn't allow it or whatever. It's just you don't need that sort of complication. So having separate restrooms is important. And then just general stuff like office supply storage and recycling and a place for packages to come into the building, things like that. We've also got building support services, mechanical, electrical, and things like that. So all told, it looks like you wouldn't fill up the city hall quite as much as maybe you have, but we haven't tried to fit all this stuff into a historic building. So I don't want to promise that we're kind of downsizing you there. Certainly if the police department moves out, you're not going to use up the entire building. And that's where we're going to get into ideas for how to use the rest of it, what you can do with it. And, maybe that third floor gets sort of shelled out as future space, or maybe the basement gets shelled out as future space and something like that. So that's a quick rundown of where we're at. Next steps are to try to put these spaces into the existing buildings, and we're looking to have that work ready to talk about by the end of this month.
Excellent. All right. Well, what will happen then from our end? I have no questions at this point. You've been very thorough with all of your explanations today. Understanding the space, I think, is one of the biggest starting points for us. We will have you back for another update once you get to the next step that you just mentioned at the end of the month, potentially in September, and then from there. That's what we're going to do.
That sounds great.
Again,
well, I appreciate your time this morning. I won't keep you from all the rest of your agenda items. Obviously, if you have any questions or concerns, I encourage you to reach out to my team and I at any time, and we'll keep plugging along.
Thank you very much, Craig.
All right. Bye, all. Have a great day.
You too. Obviously, a lot of detail in that presentation, but what we've been looking for. So, which is the reason why we chose BKB study. Do you have anything you'd like to add through all that? I can't believe
It was very thorough, informative. Kind of blew me away a little bit with numbers, but yeah.
I think it's it's very interesting how, this is the one comment I have, it's very interesting how the space without the police department and then add the police department in is almost exactly what we have available to us. So we'll see how all that goes when we get to phase 2 of the presentation. So I think sitting through all of that, still a lot more to be done. Next item on our agenda for today is any related items. Yes, sir.
I had mentioned to Mr. Yoder about the possibility of discussed previously. Is there any update on that?
So there is an update, and all I can tell you about that is that we are trying to figure out what would be the best avenue for that at this time. A couple of the ideas that we floated were a digital outreach program that we could do, potentially a town hall-esque meeting sometime in the evening where members of the public could come and speak, ask questions, things like that, and give their input. We just haven't decided upon that and when it would be. So it had internalized plans at the moment. Absolutely. Yes, sir.
You mentioned coffee.
Yes.
I have this it blew off. Landed on the railing out front, bent over it, but there is like a 7, 8 foot long piece, just so you know.
We'll get into Scotland report. Like solve all our roof problems.
It needs to go back to the building in an appropriate way, however it gets used. I'm an architect, as you know, and that's very impressive and thorough. He's going down the right path.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm sure it seems long to you guys, but I was like captivated. I couldn't see all the numbers, but it's exactly what needs to happen.
Yeah.
How you start to get your head around the big picture.
Yeah.
And he's looking at the big picture.
And which is what we've asked for this whole time. So I appreciate your input on that, too, being a
So,
I appreciate all of you being here today. We've got no other items on our agenda. And since I'm the only one here, I'm going to say that we're adjourned.
I don't